My name is Gábor Szendrői. I'm from IMAP Hungary.
My name is Tom Waslander and I'm partner of IMAP Brazil.
We are here today to talk about the 4 trends affecting consumer industry M&A activity in 2024. To lay the basics, I think the most important characteristic of the consumer sector has been the significant impact of the inflation, the recession, and the cost of living crisis that we all experienced globally. I think it introduced an uncertainty which affected the consumer industry as a whole, but also the food and beverage industry that we are going to talk about today.
Specifically for Brazil, Brazil is a large country, so we have more than 200 million inhabitants. So of course the consumer industry, and specifically within that food and beverage, we have an almost captive demand because of the sheer size of the country.
So one of the very important things that in an uncertain time large food and beverage industry players need to consider is a portfolio optimization. So obviously uncertainty impacted certain layers of the society differently. The luxury goods part seemed to be growing while those with less disposable income have more struggles. So that, in our view, leads to larger companies, the global players as well as the large local players, to optimize their portfolios.
Yeah. Specifically for Brazil, we don't have the big luxury players established in Brazil. That's really all export based. In Brazil we have more bottom of the pyramids, more basic products. So we have huge biscuits player, we have a huge rice and beans player, we have a huge beverages player, and those are also always optimizing their portfolios, making bolt-on acquisitions in Brazil to enter new segments. One of the trends that we see there is a trend for healthier foods and drinks. That's probably a trend that we will see continuing for the next 10 years. So we see that in the Brazilian universe as well.
On top of this, irrespective of the uncertainties and the market trends, there is always a question of regulation, and these days ESG is something which drives industries across the board. Specifically in food and beverage, what we see is a trend towards sustainability and recyclability of packagings that drives significant consolidation that at least we see on the European market.
Yeah, we see similar things in Brazil. The trend towards healthier foods, but as you mentioned, also a trend to more ecological packaging solutions. Perhaps that's more in the initial stage in Brazil, but we will probably eventually get there as well.
On top of that, when we speak about food and beverage, that's mostly human consumption. We shouldn't forget about pet industry, which also has a significant food, less beverage side to it. So we see a continuing growing in the pet industry and in the food related to pets, in variability, in availability, in basically moving to more processed food types.
Yeah, the pet industry is a very good point, Gábor. The pet industry in Brazil is also very large. People spending more and more on their pet friends at home. So we have several very strong multinational players there, and also 1 or 2 local players, and that's definitely a trend. More and more spending on pet, despite the pressure on consumers in terms of disposable income. The pets do not seem to be part of any constraints there.
And I think it is also worthwhile to mention an expectation in times of recession and uncertainty, the potential increase in distressed M&A opportunities, which specifically in this healthy and innovative food segment, we've seen lots of VC investments going in. Now some of those VC investors need to offload naturally their holdings. So we see an increase in opportunities for for bottom feeders to grab some of those opportunities which present themselves through ownerships in VC-funded food innovation companies.
Distressed M&A is definitely a factor, and that's probably still coming from the pandemic. Many companies are now operationally in order, but they still carry a lot of debt from the pandemic. And specifically in food and beverage, we see some cases there as well. So of course, those companies, indebted companies within the food and beverage industry.
Concerning valuations and volumes, we've observed a significant drop in transaction volumes in 2023. Interestingly, food and beverage within the consumer sector was the one which experienced the smaller decline, while, by the way, we saw retail being the hardest hit by the uncertainties. That also translated in a slight decline in valuations. Expectation for this year is that valuations stabilize, and we expect a slight increase in number of transactions in food and beverage and in consumer goods as a whole.
We see a decrease in multiples. If we look 5 years ago and today, that definitely multiples in the food and beverage industry are lower. Specifically in Brazil, normally multiples are at a discount of about 25-30% vis-a-vis global multiples. So we see the same trends in Brazil as Gábor just described globally, but we see that as an opportunity as well. Multiples in Brazil in this sector, food and beverage, are perhaps between 8 and 10 times last 12 months EBITDA now, and that's of course a very interesting entry point for multinational companies or even the big Brazilian food and beverage companies to snap up competitors.
On the back of all these trends, I think 2024 is still going to be ruled or determined by uncertainty. And in this setting, we think strategics are going to be in the driver's seat of M&A in the food and beverage industry, partially replying to these challenges in portfolio optimization, as you described, partially looking at pursuing omnichannel strategies as a theme for reaching customers even more directly than before. For private equities, we think it's going to be an opportunistic play, given that they can't factor in industry growth itself. They need to be very, very careful how they are optimizing their transaction strategies, the buy strategies towards the food and beverage sector.
Specifically for Brazil, we also see much more activity from strategics in the food and beverage industry than from private equities. It may have to do with multiples. The food and beverage industry, even at 8 to 10 times EBITDA, is a multiple range that, at least in Brazil, the private equity firms are a little bit scared of. It's normally too high for them. So for several reasons, we do think that strategics will drive the M&A activity in food and beverage going forward. We have seen food and beverage as a very important sector in Brazil, in IMAP as a whole, globally. The last 5 years, IMAP concluded more than 100 transactions in this sector, and we're quite confident that that sector will continue to be one of the leading sectors in M&A going forward.